Hello there, I'm Alyssa Olenek, scientist, exercise enthusiast, weightlifter, outdoors lover, and entrepreneur. I believe that the extremes in the fitness and wellness industries are leaving way too many of us out of the conversation, not telling us the knowledge that we actually need to succeed in our health, our wellness, our nutrition, and quite frankly, our lives. They end up giving us black and white polarizing messages that leave us more confused than giving us the answers that we need. Through my 10 years of studying exercise science, metabolism, and female physiology, as well as exploring the outdoors and being a fitness athlete myself, I'm here to bring to you the conversations that need to be had in an industry that often is too far focused on extremes. So if you join me on this podcast, I truly believe that life is best lived in the messy middle. Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Messy Middle podcast. I am really excited about today's guest, Allison Tenney. I have developed an online friendship with Allison among many of our guests that happened organically. I don't really know how it happened, but you just know one day you've been connecting with someone for a while, and I have a lot of respect for Allison. She's older than me, but she's someone I definitely look up to in the industry and just how she leads and the words that she chooses and the things that she's passionate about and the way she presents that. And something we were talking about before the podcast that we got started on is what we're going to talk about today is just a lot of the unspoken things that aren't being said in the industry. I feel like Allison does a fantastic job of talking about those and addressing those in a way that is kind of calling people out, but with a lot of grace, or calling out, maybe not necessary themes and trends that we see in the industry and better ways to approach those, but also instead of just, calling out the things that are, quote unquote, problematic or wrong or an issue, but rather addressing ways that we can better approach them or better move forward. So not just saying, hey, that's bad, but what can we actually do about it? And so Allison leads in her space with so much grace. She's a fantastic strength coach who offers programs that I feel like do exactly what you want out of a strength and conditioning program that are so accessible and inclusive to everyone. And it's something that I truly believe a lot of younger professionals in the industry could really look up to and towards, and I do that as well. And so today's episode, we want to dive into kind of some of the things that are the unspoken things that we think that can maybe be done a little bit better in the industry. And as we are on the Messy Middle podcast, we're going to talk about the messy middle. So an industry in extremes, I feel like Allison is a voice that is really in the middle, having discussions and talking about things in a way that needs to be said, but often those voices aren't magnified enough. So I'm hoping to elevate that today on this platform so we can talk about some of the things that we think are not so great, but actually tangible ways that we can move forward to improve those within our own industry. So Allison, welcome, welcome.
Dang, that intro. Thank you. I'm so pumped to be here.
It's my Leslie Noping. That's what I call it when I introduce people on podcast. I Leslie Nope people. So it gets even better if you put like one or two drinks in me. Then it's like, I love you.
Just let her go. Just let her do her thing.
Everyone thinks I'm so mean, but you give me like half an ounce of tequila and I'm like, you're beautiful and I love you and here's everything nice about you that ever existed. So
this is everybody's best friend. We love it. Get this woman a drink. Well, thank you so much for that intro. I'm excited. It's always interesting to me to think about like how people are introducing me or how people think of you, because I think perception of how you see yourself versus how the industry might see you or how your friends or people that casually know you see you. And so it is interesting the ways in which you describe me, because we all run these intersections of like strength coach, business owner, athletes, like all of our identities. And there's so much to dive into when it comes to pulling apart those identities and how we talk about them and how we platform them, position them in the fitness industry. So I'm super pumped to be here and I'm so excited to dive in.
No, I mean, it's very true. Especially when you're putting yourself online, it's hard to sometimes tease out what people are viewing you as versus what you try to showcase yourself as or perceive yourself as. So that is very interesting. I haven't been on a podcast in a while, and I feel like people only introduce me as like, this is what she's studying. Let's hear her talk. But that is a very interesting take on that. And I would say that like, you are probably one of those people of those pages that like, I don't know, I feel like every once in a while you come across people whose content is framed in a way that's different than whatever, because I feel like a lot of people are saying the same thing in the same way in a different font palette. Yeah, and like you, among a few others who like, you'll see some posts and they'll catch your attention. You're like, I'm gonna read this because this is saying something your brain just picks up on it immediately, and I think that's so necessary. So before we get started, why don't you give us a little bit of a background about you and like how you got started in the industry? Because I feel like you're one of like the secret OGs. Like people don't, you know what I mean? Like you've been here a long, long time. Not that you're like ancient, but you've really been in the industry for like a decade, and not like someone who like started when they were like 15 with like a Tumblr type thing, but like you've truly been like in the arena, as we like to say, doing this work and, you know, advocating for positive changes in our industry for so long. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background and how you kind of got to where you are today.
Well, what's interesting about my background is I actually started in the coaching industry. Before I was doing anything online, before I started my business, I was a soccer coach. So I grew up a very high level soccer player. I played Division I college soccer, and then played a little bit semi-pro after that, and then rolled that into a collegiate coaching career. So I've been coaching for, oh God, let's date myself, like 15 years. Like it's, and what's interesting about that is I started having this kind of hybrid role within my coaching career. So in college athletics, particularly women's soccer, what we found was that the strength piece, getting our college athletes in the weight room, was a bit of a block, whether we weren't getting the time slots we wanted, whether we weren't getting the attention we wanted. There was a big disconnect between what was going on in the weight room and what was going on the field. So I had this really cool opportunity and turned into kind of this hybrid role where I was doing all of the on-field coaching. So I was a center mid and a defender. So I would take that group of players and coach. And then I started doing all of the strength and conditioning. So I was connecting the loading and the periodization of what was going on the field throughout the entire season, which again, it's a shorter season for college sports, but you talk about in season, off season, your spring season, your summer. I would write the fitness packets. So I was doing all of that and making it work all year round. So I was doing on field and off field, which gave me a great head start to what I'm doing now. Like the strength and conditioning piece, the writing the programs, like figuring out what works and what doesn't work for people, how to periodize, how to like write all those programs is like the fun and the easy part for me. It's figuring out all the business stuff and all of the personal development and all the mindset stuff and everything else that comes with it. But sports were such a great teacher for me and such a great foundation for me. There's so much carryover. So I always say soccer was my first love, and it really set the foundation for how I built my business.
No, I love that because I think that, I mean, I come from a sports background too, right? Like a lot of, like I played the college lacrosse for 2 years. I grew up, like I was a tri-letter athlete in high school. I was always in the gym working out, and like my first perception of getting into fitness was like, okay, well, like how can I be a better athlete? Like that was the only way that I had approached it for so long. And I coached for a few years. Like I coached with my club team for a few summers and some other stuff. And, you know, for me, like even when I did my internships in college for like exercise rehab stuff, it was like a lot with athletes. Like I was still doing stuff like in that realm. And I think that a lot of your personal approach to how you run your strength and conditioning aspect of your business, and probably some of the views I have, is that a lot of younger trainers are coming from the like, I like fitness, it made me like a little bit better life versus like coming from an athletic background. And I think it really pulls almost too far apart the fact that like fitness is strength and conditioning, but in the gen pop. And that doesn't mean that it has to be that drastically different. You're just adjusting those pieces to factoring in more lifestyle things, right? Rather than it being someone's full-time everything. And I get this a lot with doing like concurrent training. People think it's so radical. And I'm like, the entire field of strength and conditioning is built on combining strength and conditioning. Like that is the whole practice. And like everything outside of the niche of the fitness bubble is doing these things, right? And I know you talk a lot about that stuff. So I think that'd be a great place to start. Maybe talking about like what young fitness professionals or young trainers or the fitness industry coming from the fitness, wellness, health side can maybe do better from the things that we learn in sport in like strength and conditioning and sport specific stuff, because really at the end of the day, human physiology is human physiology, right? Like it's not like you have to be an elite D1 soccer player to benefit from a lot of those things, especially like periodization, looking at the whole year, having an on season versus an off season. And I think a lot of fitness programs miss that entirely.
I think too many programs, particularly online, and we'll like kind of focus online because that's what you and I really do. Too many programs focus on such a short period of time. And I get it. It's a business model. But to me, if you're looking for strength gains and fitness gains, that program needs to be months and months and months and months of a well thought out plan. You can program hop, but only for so long. You will plateau if you're not looking at your periodization, if you're not looking at the type of strength training that you're doing. Are you working on hypertrophy? Are you working on strength? Are you working on power? All of those things can be layered in. Are you looking at your conditioning in a way that's training your metabolic systems? To me, putting those two pieces together is really important. So I think having a realistic time frame is number one. And I see too many people that will put out a 4, 6, 8 week program, or even like a 3-month program. Like my program, the Den, I position it as 3-month training blocks. Yeah. But if you were only to do it for 3 months and then go do another 3-month program, like at some point, your gains are going to max out. They'll just, right? So I think the time frame is a big deal. And then 2 other things that I see in the fitness industry that we need to do a better job of. Taking your own experience and thinking that that translates to everybody else. Like it does not. No. Just because I was a Division I college soccer player, I train with, quote, athletes, which I think the word athlete and sport performance and that type of stuff really scares people away. Everybody I work with is some type of athlete. I think we can all own an identity of athlete. That's like another conversation. But I think people take their experience of weight loss and translate it into whatever program and package it and sell it to the world. And I have a lot of problems with that, because just because it worked for you doesn't mean it's going to work for the masses. An experience does not necessarily translate into expertise. That's why it's so important to have the certifications, to have the education and the experience. And I think we get into this battle of like more certifications and more education. Like, you're getting your fucking PhD. That's freaking amazing. You also bring the experience though. So it's not just one or the other. Oh, I lost weight. I trained for X, amount of races or sport performance. So this is how everybody should train. But with the education, with the understanding, you can have this really nice combination of both. And I think we need both. And too many people in the online space I see are like, great, I worked out and had fun doing it this way, so everybody should do it this way. Or, they give these caveats like, it worked for me and it's fine if it doesn't work for you. Or like, I cannot get on board with all those caveats. Like,
and it always starts as like, well, I've been doing this. Would you want me to share more? ? Which then turns into a 4-week PDF, which then turns into a challenge, which then turns into a Fitspo Boss Babe. I'm an expert now based off of just people wanting, because people are really vulnerable in fitness and they're going to want any help they can get. And I feel like those people are almost more giving in the way that people want them to be giving, like giving away like everything they're doing, and then they're trying to replicate it. And then people get that, well, okay, well, this is working and people are listening to me. And so, especially for novices, everything's going to work at first. So then then it almost buys that like false efficiency of the program and type and stuff like that. And so I think that's like what's really missing, because even like in sports, you can be a fantastic player and a terrible coach. Like we see that in sports all of the times, right?
All the time.
All of the time. And I think that's missing. And this is like, maybe another conversation for another day, but a big issue I think that this comes from is like the business boss babe industry, who's like, it's almost like the like you are worthy fragment of the boss babe industry that's like, as you are worthy of being like, it just pushes this idea that we can all do whatever we want without any ramifications because we are deserving of it. But like, there's a difference between like being passionate and being deserving of doing these things versus being qualified. And it really gets messy when you tie that into health, fitness, and wellness. It's not like if someone doesn't have a degree in interior design, but they decide to start sharing home decor content, they're probably not gonna negatively harm someone. Like, yes, I'm sure that's annoying for people who have professional degrees in like interior design, and some Target mom is like making $1 million online, and that sucks. But like, there's a difference between maybe scamming someone and just buying an extra plant for their house versus like making these assumptions of health and fitness based off your own experience or without pursuing proper like routes of education. And I say this too with a caveat, and then I'll pass this back to you, is like, people think that like, okay, well, you have your PhD, so that makes me qualified. My PhD isn't what makes me qualified, because I'm getting my PhD with and along people who have no idea how to program anything. Like, there's people with exercise science degrees that don't know a lick of what I know. I've pursued external knowledge outside of what I've got in my official curriculum, and I've used the skills from my degree to get that. But like, you don't need, and that's where I think people get lost. They're like, well, I'm not gonna get a PhD, so like, I don't know anything, matched with the like, well, I did this, or I listened to a couple podcasts on this, so now I'm an expert and qualified to coach everyone on this as well. And I think there needs to be that better discrepancy of like, what makes us qualified to do these things. So in your opinion, then like, we'll pivot this back, because I just totally side tangent ranted, is like, for people trying to do this work, and maybe they really, and we'll maybe like pass this especially to you, because like, obviously I'm really educated, and that's not everyone's route into this field, and I don't think it needs to be. I think the people on the front line doing the good work aren't the people doing the research. Like, we're the ones that are in the top down giving you all the information that you need to know, but we need the good coaches and trainers and strength and conditioning specialists doing this work. So what do you think like would be the best approach? Because I think that you're really good at this, is like, with the grace of calling it out, like getting to pivot in the correct direction of applying these things, or making sure that you kind of are pursuing the right route of doing this work that you want to do, because passion doesn't mean qualified at the end of the day. I always like to say that.
Yeah, so this is great. And this is where it gets really nuanced and really gray and really messy in the middle. To me, it is about identity work. It's about pulling apart those identity pieces and understanding what your identities are, what lanes you occupy, what privilege you hold, and where to use your voice and where to sit the fuck down. One of the things I'm really proud about is the way I position my business. And if you look at my page, I'm not out here shouting about things that I hate or that I don't want. Or, I mean, I will, but I think there's like nuance and a way to do that in a way that shows people how you can be different, how you can make a change just by showing up as who you are. So a couple examples, like on my page, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is issues around social justice, community, connection, always coming back to using compassion, because I think too often we are so isolated and stuck in our own individualistic ways. And the way like capitalism and white supremacy and systemic racism and all of the isms work is to really isolate you and make you feel like you're alone. So then what do? You feel like shit. You sit in your own shame. You think that all of these external things will help solve your problem. So you look for the next diet. You look for the next fitness program. You look for whatever influencers are selling you, thinking that that's going to solve your problem. All they do is sell you back your own shame. Probably won't work because there's shame and guilt involved, and you're not actually doing that identity work of healing, of connecting, of finding community. So you remain isolated, you stay with your shame, and then what happens? It doesn't work. You think you're the problem. So then you go out looking for another solution. And I want to put a stop to that. Like, I want my page and my content and my programs to be a shame disruptor. so that when you come into the Den, which is my online group training program, or you're just perusing my page, you're going to laugh. You're going to feel connected. You're going to feel good about yourself. You're probably going to learn a little bit about strength and conditioning and be like, cool, I feel really good about myself. Why is that? You're not like, oh, because Allison says X, Y, and Z. It's this like, I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's just that feeling that you get, right? It's like the little spidey, it's the spidey tingle. Like, you know, when you get like the icky stickies from certain pages and you're like, ugh, I gotta unfollow. And you know, like pages that are like, wow, I could really be friends with this person. I want people to come and feel connected to me and to themselves. And I think the fitness industry is very hierarchical in terms of bodies. Talk about ableism. What bodies are good bodies? What bodies are worthy bodies? And, you know, I know this is a podcast and this will go up on your YouTube, but like, I'm like a thin white cis woman. Like, I could totally get out there, shake my booty, show my I don't have a six pack, but you know what I mean? Like, I could do those things. But that to me, when you haven't done the identity work and you're coming from a place of look at me, not come with me, you're just part of the problem. And I really think we can flip this on its head in the fitness industry of it being more of a come with me space instead of a look at me space.
Gosh, I had so many things I wish I had a notepad that I wanted to expand on all of these things. One, I want to say that right now I'm reading this book by Brad Stellenberg called The Pursuit of Groundedness, which I feel like I started in 2021, but in 2022 it started the best book I've already read. I'm a really big fan of Brad Stellenberg's work, but one of the big themes in it is like radical individualism and how that's what's deconnecting us from community and like the things that we value and actually make us feel good about ourselves. And I'm like, wow, that is so true, because like I've worked really hard the last few years, but I haven't really had a community where I'm at. And like the online space really has been my community, but obviously it's not the same, but that's so true. Like that radical individualism is like what's hurting us. And it's so true that the fitness industry just like isolates people and makes them feel like they are 100% responsible and for the shame and the guilt and the productivity of what they're doing. And so I'll plug in here because Allison's podcast will come out after the one with Dr. Karin Norden, both of hers, honestly. But her New Year's one, we talk about this. But in her first behavior change one, it's like she does a really good job of talking about behavior change from a scientific way. But like a lot of that comes from giving yourself grace and compassion and not beating yourself up in the process versus like the fitness industry. I don't think people understand. I think this may be inherent to the fitness industry, but they try so much to lead with shame. And lead with the look at me. And I think that's such great points, because I think that a lot of younger pages or professionals think that they have to impress people to get them to follow along with them, rather inspiring people to join them on what they're doing. And you can be great and succeed and do well. And I like to always say like building a bigger table rather than like instead of like building up the ladder, like building a wider table, not a higher ladder or chair or whatever it is. And like, I'm really big about that, and I try really hard to do that, but I think you do a fantastic job of doing that. So with that, what do you think, like with all of these things, like think especially because people feel really uncomfortable like after 2020 and 2021, how to approach these things gracefully, because like it feels so extreme, and even social media as itself, like you have to be careful about what you say within the apps, because your content can actually be like, I mean, I got my Instagram taken down for God knows what reason this past year. And so like, it feels really hard to navigate these things in these conversations and being graceful and like inclusive and kind of extending that reaching hand to people rather than like standing above them in a space that seems so volatile at times, and or looks like follow the leader and they're just copying what, you know, the bigger pages are doing that, you know, that works by default, rather than looking towards maybe the smaller leaders that are eliciting really good change from the bottom up that maybe doesn't get as rewarded. And I would consider like you one of those people. So what do you think like the best advice for people in that position, young coaches, trainers, professionals, or anyone even pursuing fitness, you know what I mean, as a whole can do to like flip that script on its head?
Honestly, again, like people probably are not going to really like my answers because they're
That's all right. That's what this podcast is for. That's what the podcast is for.
Easy. They're not easy. They're not fast. It has taken me years, and it is always a work in progress when it comes to issues of social justice. Like people, those things are not going away. And if you're like, man, it doesn't really affect me, or not in my life, or it's not that big of a deal, it's because you're not looking. It's because you're not looking. And to me, being part of the solution instead of pointing fingers is a huge commitment that I have. Like where I stand, I want my life, I want my family, I want my community, I want my business to be a stand for people, for humans. And for me, integrity is one of my core values for my business. And so that looks like implementing actual things within my business to be able to give back, to be able to
Yeah.
see more people. And when I say that, I mean putting pronouns on an intake form, having my anti-racism statement in my welcome packet, like things like that, that like I had never thought of before. But when people come
Yeah.
into my space, I want them to feel seen. I want them to feel safe. It's up to me to set that container. And then my clients and the people that are in my community get to decide if that's a safe space. And I will
Yeah.
say that that work that I've done, and the biggest piece of advice that I can give people is do that work offline. Do that work offline. It's so great to see people taking continued education. And I know you need those CEUs to keep your certifications. But I will tell you the work that I have done in anti racism specifically has opened more doors, deepened more relationships, and given me more success and more fulfillment than any continued education course could ever do. And I've taken them consistently, year after year, and continue to learn more about myself.
Yeah.
And that is identity work. And I think if you're willing to dive into like this is really, it's really gross. It feels really shitty. And I think that's why so many specifically, I mean, you and I are two white women. We sit on this podcast and it feels shitty when you're online and you have a black woman that shows up and is like, fuck you, white women. This is bullshit. Like that is like, oh, is she right? Is it me?
Yeah.
God, I feel really terrible about that. It's like, it's a gross feeling. But to be able to really sit with that is a skill and it has to be practiced. And you have to be able to manage your own nervous system. This is why I love training so freaking much because we can talk about sympathetic, parasympathetic, but there's so much more to it. Like our nervous systems are connected to one another.
Yeah.
That energy, how we feel community to one another, it's through your nervous system. You have to be able to manage your nervous system when you're with other humans. And if all you do is run and hide because you feel bad, how do you think people that are in those marginalized communities feel? Like,
Yeah.
so it's a bit of some perspective taking, but it's also being able to sit with those uncomfortable feelings, to have spaces that are offline to go take those uncomfortable feelings. I have
Yeah.
mentors, I have coaches, I have anti-racism partners that we would meet once a week and be like, how's your week? This kind of came up and I felt like I could share and we could problem solve together. I'm not talking about that online. Like,
No.
oh, it's like really hard stuff, right? But that's the work that happens offline. So when I show up online and I do a post about a liberatory approach or using compassion, it's because of all the stuff that I'm doing offline.
And I think people forget, and I think that what made this really hard for a lot of people who maybe didn't do this the best way, I will say, maybe in the late 2020, early
Yeah,
21
you're
time
going to fuck
periods
it up.
times, is that people felt this pressure to have to do it online. Like immediately showcase all of it online to everyone right then and there and put it all out for everyone to see. But like, that's not like, and I've definitely like, I'm not saying I've been perfect at it, but like I've done a lot and have had a lot of conversations offline with a lot of friends and a lot of people. behind the scenes. And I think it's interesting how in the online space, people were crumbling over this pressure to like showcase that. And I'm like, if you want to talk to me about any certain conversation, like I'll be honest and transparent about where I'm at in this journey. I'm not perfect. I'm light years behind you, but like trying to just be a good person includes this. And I think people forget that like if you're in coaching is working with people, coaching is literally having human relationships, and people forget that that's like where a lot of success in coaching is. And like I can be the most knowledgeable person in the world, but if I don't know how to talk to someone at where they're at or their experience or like their differences and I guess lived experience from us, which again, I don't work as much one-on-one with people, but like, especially if you're working in like that one in-person space with people, like I can only imagine how important that is for making sure that you're not doing things that are indirectly harming people and not knowing it and listening. And it is really uncomfortable, but I think that, you know, that's where a lot of people got it wrong. And of course, I'm not an expert on these things, but like there was just this pressure from everyone that like you had to all of a sudden overnight have it figured out and show your shit to the world. Where like that was like not what anyone was actually asking. They just like that. I don't feel like I was like watching that all unfold, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna fuck this up. But no one's asking us to put on a show and dance. They're asking if they come back to our pages a year later, we still are showing signs of that inclusivity and improvement and trying and extending that grace. And those, it is. I think a lot of people just don't take the time to know themselves and know why things make them feel uncomfortable. They just brush them aside rather than saying, okay, like, do I actually have an opinion on this that is different? Or is this just something that I don't want to feel and dig into?
Yeah, that I don't want to feel because it's uncomfortable. And I'm sorry, but we're all human. Who wants to feel uncomfortable? Like
we're wired to not do that. Like you're not.
This is why, you know, it's like real cute that everybody wanted to be part of a book club, but you have to be a bit more uncomfortable than that. And so to me, it's figuring out the right coach, the right mentor, the right spaces for you to continue to do that work. Otherwise, it does become just performative. And it's easy. Well, I think it's easy to do that stuff online because it's a quick flash in the pan, right? Like stories are gone in 24 hours. You can go back and like curate your feed. You can put something up, but it doesn't actually mean that it is being integrated. And I really think that the integration, whether that's like yourself, your own identity, your own beliefs, thoughts, habits, how those are being integrated into your life or in your business, coming up with your diversity, equity, inclusion statement. How is that being put into your business plan? Are you giving back? Like what's the plan there? Integration takes time. And so when you ask people immediately, you put people on the defensive, and I'm sorry, but like white people are we don't do well, like being backed into a corner and being defensive. It's just not going to go well.
No, never.
We're going to dig in. We're going to dig in. We're going to get defensive. Like there's nothing wrong with like, it's just this whole slew of stuff and it just doesn't end well. So to me, the biggest advice that I can give people is do the work offline and stay with it. It's a slow drip.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing there is, again, because I'm still really trying to do my own working of these things in my business continually, is that I really made a point and promise when this all started that I was not going to be reactive online about any of these things, because that's where things go wrong. And that's why I love this saying of like doing it offline, because that is like where real meaningful work and conversations and connectors are having. I think people forget that a lot of conversations in the online space end up being really volatile and extreme and never actually solving anything. It's just banter and a waste of time. It's not actually progressing anything. And every once in a while you have those. But I think people I think that also ties into like, that's not giving people a pass to not ever do anything and not talk about it and hide behind the scenes and just say like, oh, well, I'm just not, I'm not doing the work in the online space. Like you do want to try to integrate positive forward motion in your business as best as you can. And again, I know someone's going to come back and be like, oh, like you could be better at this. And like, I agree I could be better at this. Like, that's why we're having these conversations on my podcast and hosting these things. with all of this. And so I think that there's that fine line between like people, I feel like a lot of people were like, felt like they were pressured to say and do things, but then also feeling like, don't take this as a pass to being like, well, don't do anything. Like just be quiet, don't do anything, but rather being active without being performative, right? And I think it ties, if we want to make a fitness analogy, it's like when people are new to fitness and they just consume all the fitness information, but they don't do anything with that. Like they just follow the pages and do all the things and like, oh, I like that. Oh, I don't like that. But then like, that's kind of it. And a lot of people know people do that with training and coaching, but kind of, I feel like, do you feel like that's what people do with the same approach to this?
For sure. I think it's you're acting out of guilt, which is never a good motivator, never something that's sustainable, acting out of guilt. So you run into a lot of white guilt when it comes to this stuff. And when you dive in, it feels like you're drinking out of a fire hose. Like there's no way around it. You're just drinking out of a fire hose because it's so new to us. At least it was for me. And I'll speak to my own experience. But because I had started that work because of the event that I run, Ignited Women's Summit, I had already been having those conversations. I'd already started those identity shifts. I'd already like been in therapy over this shit for years. So when 2020 happened, was it hard? Was it nuanced? Was it like all of the things? Yes. And because I had done that work and was already having those conversations, I was able to show up in a way that was still authentic, that wasn't reactive, where I could take that pause, where I was checking in on true friends, not just reaching out to my Black friends. Like there's things that you just start to learn because you've fucked it up along the way. And I think that's really important, is that I'm not perfect. I continue to have these conversations offline, which is why I'm able to show up online the way I do. And I think, again, it's hard to explain, but it is one of those like intangible things. When you do the work offline, you just show up differently online, and people feel that. They feel that in your space. They feel that in your community. And I think that's really important. Like you probably, if someone was to like peruse my Instagram page, I'm not like social justice. Like it's not a social justice page. It's not an anti-racism page. It's a strength and conditioning page that has lenses through which I see the world. And when you can see oppressive systems and oppressive structures as a lens through which you coach and see people, it changes the way you show up to your space. Full stop.
Yeah, and I think that's where people are missing when it comes to, as you said earlier, all the isms, all the things, where people are like, well, how do I integrate this all in my business? And it's just, if there's just a different tone in the way people approach things that just makes that environment as a whole for everyone, no matter who they're speaking to, feels more welcome in that space. And I feel like people do feel like you have to be this like very extreme stance person, but we're still fitness pages. But the fitness industry in itself does a really bad job at being inclusive to anyone that just like, than like the small percentage of people that are typical to engage in physical activity. And rather than like forgetting that the mission of being in the jobs that we are is to actually make impact and actually improve the health of other people and actually get them in and feeling invited and not using shame as that tactic to do it. And that like, if you are weaving this into your message subconsciously, people see that, they know it, right? Like I'll use the perfect example for me because obviously like there's a lot of different things that you could be inclusive with racism and like gender. And for me, I work in female physiology research. So a lot of that is done on cis women, right? Typically that's a cis woman space. And I got really uncomfortable at first because I was like, how do I make it so when I was afraid to talk about the content of my research because I was afraid to not be inclusive. And I just didn't for a little bit because I was like, okay, like you need to like figure out a way like with yourself first before you post and then get reactive if someone approaches you or gets mad or things like that. Like how are you going to handle these conversations? How are you going to present this in a way that can be both true to what the science is versus inclusive to people and what they are? And I had to really take a pause there and like, how do I do this? Because I care about people at the end of the day, right? Your business should care about people. And like if something people say this language is harmful to me, or this feeling is harmful to me, or this hurts me. I'm like, okay, that's a really easy change, right? Like putting pronouns in your bio is a really, really easy. It doesn't really take any effort for you to do, whether you are comfortable with it or not, right? Like you can still be, but that's like zero effort, right? To just extend that one little bit of grace forward. But I've worked really hard at doing that, and it wasn't comfortable for me at first because I didn't know the appropriate way. I didn't know the correct way to do it. But luckily I have friends in the LGBTQ community, and I can reach out to them and say, hey, like, what is the way that I should approach this to make sure I'm doing it correctly? And like, am I handling this correctly? Or like, did I handle the situation correctly? Like I have a really good friend here, and she's just great with that. And like, I try to make sure that I'm doing that. And you never think, and I don't feel like the language that I use is that big of a deal, but the amount of people who thank me for it, I'm like, but that shouldn't be the abnormal, right? Like we should be striving to make those things the normal for people to feel like when they're reading their post and their content that it applies to them. And obviously like not every post applies to every person. Like I'm not saying that. We can never do that in the world of social media. But like as a general sense, you can like, I mean, you might marginalize out someone who's not training for an endurance race if you're talking about running. Like that's not what we're talking about here. But just making sure people can come to your page and see your content and like feel welcome in your space, and like they could actually buy into what you're saying, and not like, well, I can't sit at this table. This table here is trying to go up but not out when they come there, right? To use my table analogy, I guess, again.
Yeah.
But
people need to be able to see themselves. And I think one of the things you said about like wanting to like really get it correct, I think a couple things, like if we can pull on that thread a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is what stops a lot of people from speaking up. Because if we're talking about health, we're talking about people's well-beings, and as fitness coaches, that's our job, right? And so if you're not seeing systems of oppression, you're not helping people the way that you might think that you are. So I think that like putting that out there is number one. And that's why it's so important to learn to sit down, sit on your hands, don't do anything, just learn, just like soak it up, learn other people's lived experiences, like really listen without needing to like do anything. That's like number one. And number two, what I think like you did was get really curious. And I think if we can respond with curiosity instead of responding to be right, we would solve so many of our freaking problems with people that hop into the DMs, with emails. Instead of like getting defensive now, my initial reaction is always to like pause. And my pause has gone from like a 48-hour pause of like, I'm crumbling emotionally, I'm falling apart, I'm a terrible human, I've like totally wrong, like, right, like I would crumble and have to pull myself together, have like an emergency therapy session to like respond to people, that now it's like, okay, let me take a few hours and see what did I miss, because it doesn't make you a bad person, right? Like we can accept the fact that intentions might be good, but impact matters more. And so if we can get really curious about our own reaction and maybe put ourselves in other people's shoes and know that that took a lot of bravery for that person to hop into your DMs and be like, hey, just wanted to let you know, right? Like that email they sent, that DM, that phone call, that's a brave phone call on their end, and how you respond and how you receive that is really important. So I think what you did, Lyss, in getting really curious, instead of being like, well, fuck it, I'm working with women and this is it. And like, you understand that you have a big impact on the world. We can have a big impact. And how fucking cool is that if you do this work, how you can positively impact people. And I wish more people would care about that impact than just lean into, well, I meant well. Like, okay, cool.
But you can
meanwhile,
but that circles back into the whole beginning conversation that we just had of like, well, I mean well when I'm sharing my personal experience. I mean well when I'm doing things. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but that doesn't mean that you can't be harmful. And this applies to so many things. Like this just goes on in this whole conversation, that I think that the social media space has created that environment of like, well, if your intentions are good, But what
Just
what
do it.
barometer are you setting your intentions, right? Like who's dictating
Right.
what's a good intention versus a bad intention other than your own personal opinion, and then that's biased by what you maybe have experienced and believed and might skew what you view as a good intention, right? So
Exactly.
like it's all of these things get so messy, and it is hard work, right? Like I feel like, I mean, I shared my little story there because I think other people might be like, okay, well, everyone gets it right except for me. And like, no, like we fuck it up
No.
all of the time. All of
I'm
the time.
every year so like outside of my kind of like a side, oh God, is it a side hustle? I run an event called
Yeah.
Ignited Women's Summit, and that has been its own personal journey, its own growth
Yeah.
because of the conversations that we're having in the health industry. But I intentionally bring in speakers that are talking exactly about these things. Now, are they talking about anti-racism? No. But they're Black women in the health space that have a different lived experience than all of us white women, and they're experts in their field. And let me tell you, every year that I've hosted it or I market it or I talk about it, it's fucking messy. And I don't think that, like, oh, I do the work offline and I have mentors and people that I turn to. Like, again, not perfect. There are lots of tears. There's lots of therapy. There's lots of like angst and anxiety and worry. But to learn how, again, to like sit with those, to ground myself, this is where like your practice in whatever, in strength training, in running, in meditation, in journaling, in whatever your like quote practice is so important. Because when those things pop up, and maybe it's not around like your anti-racism work. That's what it is a lot of times for me. Maybe it's
Yeah.
around the work you're doing inside of your own family or your own trauma or whatever it is. You have to have something and people to lean into. So if it's strength training, if it's, whatever practice that is for you, which does not
Yeah.
take the place of therapy as well. And maybe
Yeah.
medication.
I mean, maybe that too.
And maybe
Now,
medication.
yeah. So I think like my question for that then for you is that is really good pivot off of this is like, have you gotten, I don't know if I'll even ask the question correctly, but
Yeah.
have you gotten a lot of backlash or had a hard time with the approach of like you host that Ignite Women's, which I unfortunately couldn't go to this past year. But some lovely person went for me. I don't even know who I gave that ticket to, but
Yep. She came up
Kylie,
and
I
was
don't
like,
even
I love
remember.
Lyss. She got me my
I was
ticket.
like, I don't even remember who I gave my ticket to, but like, I'm glad someone else got to go instead of me. Now, how do you manage that? And I feel like you do obviously do a really good job in the industry of having a lot of like anti-racism work and like elevating the voices of Black women. And that whole conference was hosted with just that. And honestly, I didn't really realize until this year that that's what it was. I knew you had done it in the past, but I don't think I had like really saw it in the past. And I remember being curious, like, how do you manage that without feeling like, do people give you backlash because of being a white woman doing that? Or do people give you backlash because you only have Black women at your conference? Or do you deal with any of that when you talk about the messiness? Or does it seem to be very well received from your community?
It seems to be well received from my community because of how intentional I am around that event.
Yeah.
After year one, I
Yeah.
went through a huge learning curve where I only had white women. Now, one of them was in the LGBTQIA community. So I was like, oh, Lori's gay. So I'm like, I
Yeah.
went through like a big learning curve after year one, but that's when all of my work really started. And I started having lots of conversations offline. The difference, and I think the way I position it is not, hey, look at this conference with all these Black women at
Yes.
all. I go and find industry leaders. So when I want somebody to talk about online business and Instagram, Shante Cofield, the movement maestro, is the best. You go
She
get
is.
Shante to speak at your event. If you want to talk
Yeah.
about pelvic health and sex, you get Dr. Uchenna Usai at UC Logic. Like, I just get industry leaders to come talk about maybe like, again, at a health and fitness industry, talking about like sex and sexy time for like UC was
Yeah.
very different, but very important for me. So I want to bring in industry leaders that are talking about health and wellness in a more well-rounded, more comprehensive way. And so when you bring in people with expertise and a different lived experience, you're going to open that up to a lot more people. And I want more white women to experience that. So at the conference, there are a lot of white women because I'm a white woman. I'm the one talking about it, marketing it. But
Yeah.
because of the panel of speakers, it also brings in this different feel to it.
Yeah.
So would I bring in a white woman? Of course.
Yeah.
Do I have to do that? No, because there's so many Black women and women of color that are doing unbelievable things in the space that we need to hear from. And that's one of my
Yeah.
commitments. So I think that's why
I
I
love
don't get a
that.
lot of backlash, because I'm not like this anti-racism speaker. It's not an anti-racism event.
No, it's a fitness event.
It's a
Fitness and wellness
it's
event. It's
a
a fitness
health
and
and
wellness event.
wellness and leadership event. And the
Yeah.
fact that there are all women of color up there speaking is like, cool. But it's a leadership
Yeah.
and health event. It's not an anti-racism event. And that is a clear shift in the information that you're going to get. You're just getting expertise from women of color. And I think that's
And
so fucking cool.
I wanted to ask that one because I assumed that was the response, but I wanted to like kind of get that on the pod for people to see, like, if your intentions are pure and good and then you're doing these things, then usually, like, I think people are worried to do anything because they're always worried they're going to get like yelled at, or you know what I mean? But like, rather than showing that like the way you approach these things can just make it a normal part of your brand or the work that you're doing, because they are just fitness and professionals. Like, you don't have to say anti-racism event. Like, you can just say fitness professionals who know what they're talking about are going to come and speak at this event, because that's what they are. And I think that like a lot of people maybe, like, from what I observed last year when I was still learning and evolving, is that those people's job isn't to always be your anti-racism educator. They're not. They're fitness professionals. Yeah, like that's their job. They're fitness professionals, just the same as everyone else. And so I think it's incredible that you put that on, and we can even plug that in the show notes. I mean, I'll plug Allison's stuff so that when it comes around next fall, you could potentially attend, because I was very bummed out that I couldn't go to that this year. Hopefully next year, we'll see. Who knows what I'm doing with my life, but I will make it a point. I'm going to try to get out there. I'm going to try, because it looks incredible. And I'm really glad you were able to have it in person this past year as well, which makes it even all the better. So, okay. I feel like there were so many things in that whole conversation to unpack, but I think with that being said, building off this, or in general, is there anything else that like you really see in the field and the industry that can help people to maybe just as a whole figure out who the fuck they are? Because I think that's like a big missing gap, and maybe that's because our field is dominated by early 20-year-olds, and I feel like you do a really good job at, like, as a whole, regardless of the niche or situation or topic, of like really, in a really very wordsmithy way, approaching how you call out these things that make contrast between things that we often don't think can exist together, or like calling us in to like reflect on who we are a little bit better. And I think that, maybe that is because our industry is so dominated by people who haven't taken that time yet to like be alone, like really spend time alone with themselves and their thoughts, which we know is like a problem across our whole society right now, I guess. Correct. We don't like that. I think the book I'm reading says people would rather be electrocuted. There's like studies that say people would rather be electrocuted than sit alone with their thoughts or wait in line and stuff like that.
Stop.
Yeah. So I think that, like, for me, maybe like this is why, my page, because I kind of grew my page in my early 20s, but like I spent a lot of time in my really, really early 20s alone. Like, people joke about me running ultramarathons and asking me how I do it. I'm like, you spend enough time in the woods alone without cellular connection, you're going to learn a lot about yourself. Like, you are going to learn a lot about yourself doing that. And I don't think people have, like, that's always my advice for people, is like, turn off your phone, go outside, figure out who the fuck you are. Like, that was like my journey into that exploration of self journey. I feel like we should probably add therapy to that for all intents and purposes for people. That's usually probably a very general, helpful way to figure out who you are. But I feel like, as someone who's a veteran, not maybe a veteran, but like an OG in this work, in this field, and like leading from the bottom up, what would be your best advice for people who are kind of in this niche, or in general, really, like whether you're consuming or creating fitness content or training or coaching, to really dig in and be okay with that messy of like figuring out who they are and how that translates into a better, more honest business practice?
Oh, I love that. I love that question. A better, more honest business practice. You're only going to understand yourself better when you spend the time doing those things. Reps. And here's like the strength piece again. How do you get stronger? You lift. How do you understand yourself better? You do that work to understand yourself by being alone, by spending time sitting and fucking thinking. Like,
Yeah.
I know it sounds like maybe kind of weird, but I'm like, yeah, I do spend a lot of time just usually my workouts. I'm like one of those weird freaks that like doesn't listen to music during my workouts. Like, I just am very amused by my own thoughts and will write
Yeah.
things down and just sitting outside for a few moments. Like, I'm okay inside my own head, which sometimes can be like a double-edged sword because I'm like, is this normal? Should I have three voices that are like, all talking to me and trying to figure things out? But I do think it's
Yeah.
good what you said about being alone. Like, I went on a 3.5 day silent retreat right before the pandemic
Oh,
hit. Like,
wow.
no phone, 3.5 days of silence.
I don't know. I
Everybody
talk
had
to myself, I feel
jobs.
like. Yeah.
Everybody
That's
had
crazy.
jobs. Like, I was up at 6 o'clock in the morning, like cleaning toilets is like my job. And you got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And there was meditation for like hour and a half in the morning, like silent retreat. And I had a bunch of friends
Wow.
that were like, how the fuck did you do that? I'm like, I don't know. I just, it's cool inside my head. So getting
Yeah.
to
I
know
think that's,
yourself, spending that time, not that you have to go on a
yeah.
silent retreat, um, but unpacking those pieces of yourself that you have to really sit still to understand and to be okay with. And to me, it's not about getting rid of them. It's not about, you know, the pieces of myself that I don't like as much that really like bother me. The practice
Yeah.
for me is about offering those pieces more compassion. Like, what does 8-year-old Allison need to hear? What was
Yeah.
college Allison doing that like still kind of bothers me, but got me to where I am today? And so really,
Yeah.
I've had identity shifts and identity shattering, being a college athlete and then not having soccer anymore and moving from a coaching space into an online business space, becoming a mother. I have 2 kids, getting married. Like, there's all of these pieces of identity that get layered and layered and layered. And if you're not doing that work to understand yourself, and how you show up in spaces with context, because we all show up to spaces with context.
Yeah.
When you understand yourself better, it helps you show up as more you. And the world needs more you. We need more Lyss. We need more me. Like,
Yeah.
we need more like
Yeah.
magical, like the essence of you. And when you understand yourself, you're able to show up in a congruent way in ways that only you can. That's what we need.
I love that. And I think like obviously like I'm not a business coach or expert, but I feel like I've learned a thing or two between the insane rapid growth that my business has had the last few years.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people look to me and look up to me, and like at the end of the day, I'm not successful because I have a PhD, and Allison isn't successful because she's a really good strength and conditioning coach. Like, people like us are successful because we are ourselves. We are consistently ourselves. We know ourselves. We own ourselves. We're okay with being like, hey, I don't love these pieces of me, but these other pieces are pretty damn great, and I'm gonna bring them as they are. And it is hard when you like, especially being in the online space, people are gonna expose the parts of yourself that you don't actually like a lot, like reacting before responding and stuff like that. I mean, I'm definitely a hothead. But like, I think that as a whole, people either lean in too hard to one identity or having a fixed mindset of just the one identity that they are, rather than assessing all of those layers and who they are, because they are all what make you who you are. But when it comes to like, making content or coaching or programming or all of these things, I think people really underestimate how much like when you actually know yourself, it leads to confidence, it leads to self-efficacy, it leads to being okay with sitting in moments of things being difficult and messy or not comfortable. And it just, you get better at humaning. I think people like spend so much time running away from who they are because they hate themselves because of all that shame and guilt that we talked about in the beginning, rather than leaning into it and finding that humanness within themselves and getting vulnerable with themselves though. Like, not just like talking to your friends, but like I'm talking like really spending time like being frustrated because I feel like the people are like, there's this journey of finding yourself. Like, no, you are who you are, but you need to figure out who that is, right? Because the world's seeing and perceiving you, right? People have an assumption about who you are, but that's not what you're looking for. Like, who you are isn't something that you're finding and that's going to shift and change, but it's kind of just knowing yourself. And I don't think people like, people say like dating yourself, right? People don't go do things on their own. They're not going and spending time alone. They're always surrounded by a cell phone or work or an email or a partner or a friend or a spouse or a kid, and rather just sitting and being, okay, like who is Alyssa? Who the fuck am I, right? And I feel like I'm constantly doing that.
What do they want?
And I don't, yeah, oh my God, I cannot get started enough on how much I don't think people ask themselves enough. What do I actually want? Do I actually want that?
Not what I see online that Lyss is doing, but what do I want? Like I actually, this is a trap that I fall into all the time. I'm actually recording a podcast on this, like in, I don't know, just a few minutes, but like the compare game. I tend to have a lot of my best friends don't have kids. And they also run a lot of really successful online businesses. And I will compare myself to a lot of colleagues and people online. And I'm like, fuck, like I just feel behind or it's not good enough. Like, right. Like I still have those thoughts, but context matters. I have two young kids and I'm not like, it's my kids that prevent me. I move at a much slower pace because of my family and because of the work that I choose to do. And those are choices that are mine. Now, does my business look the same as theirs? No, but I have to catch myself and offer myself compassion to be like, I love what I've built. I love my business. I love my life. And those are choices that I've made. I could make different choices and buy Lyss's books and programs and do an ultra. I would probably go insane though. Like that's not a good choice for me. And just because I see Lyss doing it and it's like, I fucking love watching you lead. That's not for me. And so I can cheer you on from the sideline and be supportive, but I don't need to compare myself to you because those aren't my choices.
Yeah, and I think I talked about this in my Balance is BS podcast last year because I feel like the balance question comes from a lot of comparison. It's not out of curiosity. It's just truly, because I got a lot of bad backlash on that post because I think a lot of people were projecting onto it rather than understanding that like what they're actually asking people when they're asking that. They're like, well, I just truly want to know. Like you either need to ask for help or you need to get curious. You need to stop asking people in an accusatory way. I don't know how to say that. I'm phonetically challenged, but of what they're doing. And I think people forget that like within that, on the flip side, you're forgetting that other person's experience that you're comparing to because you're holding them above you. You're assuming that they're above you rather than asking, okay, like what does that look like for them, right? Because I'm on the other end right now where I'm in a season of life where like, I so desperately don't want to be doing all that I'm doing. And you tell that to people and you express that and people are like, well, you can still do more. You can still do this. You can still meet this demand. And I'm like, but at what point are you dehumanizing these people rather than being like, okay, but what are they giving up? Or what are they feeling on the other end, right? Like not saying that like I'm better or worse off than anyone or whatever, or like I necessarily want 2 young children. But like on the flip side of that, it lacks that curiosity of understanding, well, what are those people that you're comparing yourself to either prioritizing differently, giving up that you don't want to give up and you're okay with not giving up, or like what season of their own personal life are they in versus the season that you're in? And that's very valid, right? Even comparing myself to myself a few years ago, I look back at my early stages of business and I'm like, I really had that moment like in the past few months where I'm like, I actually now understand how everyone else feels because I'm like, how the fuck did I pull all this off? Right? But I don't think I thought a thought that wasn't a thought for like 4 years, right?
Yeah.
But those moments of like tying back into the other thing we talked about though, like for me, someone who doesn't like have that natural clarity of living in my own brain, it's those moments of seeking out myself where I had to like to fine tune all of the noise to actually hear myself, actually hear my own thoughts, actually hear what Alyssa wanted, what Alyssa was thinking, what Alyssa, not all of that other noise. And that's really hard to do, especially like when your brain is more frantic like mine. For my people who are maybe not as comfortable leaning in, like my boyfriend Regis is really good at just sitting in his brain all day, like you probably much so are. And I'm in my head all day, but it's like crazy radio static. And I don't think enough people take that time to fine tune in to like what voices and noises are like the comparison versus the projection versus the like, you know, what you told that you should have or what you told you should want versus like tuning in out that to like the AM station that's clean of like your own internal monologue of what that actually is. And if I didn't spend that time these last few years, I feel like doing that, I would have been lost, right? Like I think the only reason I really have gotten to the point I am now is because I come back time and time again to myself and listening to myself and taking that time. And I feel frustration, like if I don't have enough time where I like am here, like I can feel that, right? You don't, it's like, maybe that's the groundedness, like that book that I'm reading. But like, if you go a while without checking in with your own self, you kind of start to feel that the more you lean into that. That was a side tangent of that. But I feel like that's where we start thinking that our thoughts that are the comparisons and the projections and the assumptions are our own, rather than like, they're just noise and we're not being curious, or we're not actually asking what we want at the end of the day. Sorry, that was a really long turnaround back to that point.
I think you're right on. And narratives that we've been handed. So, you know, and I see it like all the time in the fitness industry. I don't know if people are so sick of it, but like women should be small and thin and petite and not lift heavy weights and don't get bulky. I'm just like, yeah, we got it. And maybe people are like, oh, I didn't know I could choose how I want to show up in my body.
It's crazy.
But those are narratives and beliefs that we've internalized. And if you don't sit and be like, oh, I guess I don't have to be small. I don't have to shrink. I can choose to do something different, right? Like that's that experience that you're talking about, really tuning in, dialing in, getting to the signal and getting away from all of that noise. And to me, what you're talking about, like coming home to yourself, to me, adding like a little bit more nuance and a small layer to that when you go away, when your mind wanders, when you have those thoughts, when you're like, God damn it, Allison, you're fucking idiot. Like all that stuff of like, I should have done that thing and they're doing it so much better. And how come I can't stick to it?
Yeah.
It's the noticing. And then while you're away, giving yourself compassion to come home. Like, oh, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
There's the meanness. There's the unkindness. Can I offer myself the compassion to come back home to my body, to myself, to my own bones? And I think a lot of us miss that compassion piece, because then my best friend calls it the second, I think it's maybe Buddhism. She calls it the second arrow. I get mad at myself for like saying like the first crappy thing, but then I get double mad at myself for knowing that I've said the crappy thing. You just like, it's like the
and you
second
can't,
arrow.
you have to be nice to yourself. I talked about this again. We'll link Dr. Karin Norton's podcast here, but we talked a lot about like how your thoughts aren't your truth. They're just thoughts. And you can objectively look at them and figure out where they're coming from, and then come back into yourself to recognize where that's coming from. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the truth about who you are. I think too many people take those thoughts as the truth, or those messages that they hear. I get so many things from people who are like, well, one person once told me that you can't do this. And I'm like, and you've lived your whole life accepting that? You didn't ask. You didn't even ask like that who said that, and is that true, and like did you figure out for yourself? And it's like the craziest things, like even for me, like the bulky thing is like very cliche in the industry, but like for me, one I get all the time is how many women are like, I didn't know you could be petite and lift. I didn't know that you could be short and run. I was like, in what universe are you, if you're an able-bodied individual, are you physically incapable of bipedal motion? Like, in what universe? Like, but you just accepted that? Like, you're like, well, I'm short, so I can't lift or run. I'm like, well, then what are we? Are short people like incapable of doing anything but sitting on the couch for the rest of their lives? Like, I'm like, I can't be your hero for being petite. Like, I'm not gonna take ownership of that. But there's like very weird, random examples like that of people who are like, I'm truly like, one person told you that and you accepted that as truth, or you told yourself this and you decided it was truth without getting curious, again, probably coming back to that, of if that is actually a universal truth or just noise at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Man.
It's wild. It's wild to me, the things we accept about ourselves based on feedback or things from other people. And I get that that's hard. And again, that's like the identity work, the therapy, the stuff that needs to happen offline, that all helps you show up online and in your business and in your relationships. I see my business as relationships. Like I know all of my clients, I don't sell an ebook to thousands of people, right? Like my group programs are much smaller, but I'm building relationships to other people who have full, busy, overwhelming, joyful, wonderful lives, who all want different things. And so I try to really check my own assumptions and let people have their own experiences. That's been very freeing to me. Because so much of the stories that we make up in our own heads, like, I mean, we all just love being the hero in everybody's story. Like, newsflash, like, you're only the hero in your own goddamn story. Like, nobody's thinking about you that much.
No. And I think that people forget too, especially if you are sharing your life in the online space, is that even if you're doing stuff behind the scenes, it's still going to show up in how you show up. Like, people are watching you evolve, but like, if you stay true and consistent to who you are, people are going to see that. But it is messy and hard. Like, I just went through a very hard season of life with my relationship with Instagram and social media and my community and following, after like trying to reestablish the behavior that I was willing to accept in that space and the interactions that I was willing to have. And I fucked up a ton in trying to re-navigate that. But I had to re-navigate that relationship with 70,000 people. While I was re-navigating that relationship, right? Which makes it hard and messy. Even though I was doing work behind the scenes, like, it did alter how I was showing up in that relationship. So like, for those of you who do have pages and platform, keeping in mind that like, while you're doing and figuring out who the fuck you are off the scenes, like, we're in our 20s and 30s and 40s, like, all your whole life, you're evolving and growing and changing and reshifting as a person. And not everyone's gonna align, quote unquote, I guess you wanna call it, with the versions of you that you are, but like, you're doing it in the off,
Nor do you want them
behind
to.
the scenes. Yeah, and nor than you want them to, but you are gonna have to be okay with being yourself and being a little bit messy publicly, because it's just gonna happen. It's just gonna happen because you're figuring out who you are, and that is gonna affect how you run the face of whatever you're coaching or your business and stuff like that. And so, you do that work offline, but you're going to have to be okay with showing up as you are still, and, knowing that who you are might change and people might not like that when you do.
And one of the things that I think you do really, really well is that showing up. So many people, I get the question a lot, like, how do I build confidence? How do I gain confidence?
Yes.
And I think it was not easy. One of the benefits of being a soccer coach was like, coaching kind of just comes naturally to me. Now there's a whole profession there, but I was already coaching. I could already read people. Like, I had that experience. But one of the things I think you do really, really well in the online space is you show the fuck up. And so if you want confidence, how do you build confidence? You get reps. You are consistent. You show up, even if that's repurposing content, if that's just showing your face and saying hi to people. Getting used to those things builds, I think instead of building confidence, I want people to build self-trust, because if you trust yourself, you're going to trust whatever happens, and that's where the confidence is. So instead of this, like, how do I build confidence? It's, what steps can you take to build self-trust? And then the confidence comes.
No, I love, I fully agree. I'm going to shamelessly plug the episode that's going to come out at the beginning of this season, my year of radical self-responsibility, because part of that is like owning when you have your choices that you can make versus the one you can't make, but controlling that, but like showing up for yourself and knowing that you can trust yourself to follow through on the promises you make to yourself, and like giving yourself that grace and compassion and taking ownership of that in a way, though, that's like you showing up for yourself, not like taking like, ownership of things that you can't control, but like you can be there for yourself and show up for yourself. And that's where I think people forget, like, they think confidence is like, well, they're just a confident person. I've never been a confident person. Like, do you do the reps? Do you show up for yourself? And do you know that you can trust yourself, right? Because like Allison and I both said, like, Allison, I think, like, if you guys go to her page, if you're not following her yet, like, her platform radiates authenticity. Allison is 100% like who she is and who she says she is, and she's going to show up that way. But that doesn't mean that you're always going to be perfect and that you think that you're perfect all the time, but it's accepting your own humanness within that imperfection and showing up as you are. And like, that's what makes, when pages, I think, is it Chantel? Is that how you say her name?
Shante. The movement Maestro.
So, the movement Maestro. I really am phonetically challenged, and people don't know that, and they make fun of me so bad for my spelling issues. So I read things and I don't actually know how to say them. So I always am so nervous with names. But she does a really good job, I think, in her content of really highlighting that. Like, that's what she, I think, does really good, that makes it stand out compared to other like people in her position in the field, is she's like all about like, just show up as you are. Be messy, be human, accept it, be reliable, like, be consistent, like, don't put all this pressure on it. And I think that's like why I always refer out to her for people who are like, I don't do business stuff, social media stuff, but like, go follow this page, because
Same.
She does a really good job at calling people out and calling them in to just kind of stepping in as themselves. Because that's like, if you're looking at the pages that you follow and you respect and you try to look up to and emulate, either some of them are putting on a massive facade, yes. But like for the most part, the ones you really relate to are the ones that are just willing to be human there with you.
And you're seeing people, you have to remember that you're seeing people in process. Like the Allison I am today, and the authenticity, and like, you know, I love doing reels and my content is aligned and like all these things I love about my business. You're seeing this version of me today. And so I think people think that in their businesses to like get started and how do I show up and how do I gain confidence, they're trying to like get to that arrival place to feel like they're at this like specific spot before they start. And it doesn't work like that. I've gotten to where I am today because I showed up again and again and again and again and again and again. I told a friend just a couple weeks ago, she's like, how do you post every day? I'm like, well, now it's just more of like a habit. And honestly, I open up my notes app, which literally has, I'm looking at it now, has 824 notes in my notes app. I will just scroll through, be like, oh, I said that in 2018. Really? Let's edit that a little bit, repost, like repurposing content, updating things, but every day. So you're seeing people in process. You can't compare. Like if you would have seen me 3 years ago, I'd be like, oh, that might be a little embarrassing. Like it's not the same. So, you know, you can't compare yourself to where people are now and think that you're going to show up like Lyss today in her business. Like it's taken her years to build. Same with myself. Same with someone like Shante. Like it's been years in process. If you're not starting that now, you're just going to wish you had.
Yeah. And I think that it's ironic because fitness coaches, I think they do a lot of like blaming clients or like whoever they're working with for things that they actually do themselves once you remove them from fitness. You know what I mean? So like, they're like, well, don't compare yourself in the beginning to people who've been doing it for years, but then they start a business and then they're like, well, I suck. I'm a piece of shit. I suck because I'm not where this person 6 years ahead of me is. Right? And they're doing the same thing that they're like, maybe not always shaming clients for, but trying to remind them of without giving them that same reminder of like, because I remember, and having that fixed mindset of that, because I remember when I first wanted to start my business and I like was starting in the fitness industry and really thinking that I could never grow, I'd never be anybody, like because I had that mindset of like, well, I don't show up with my half naked body and post flashy workout videos and booty stuff and this and that, so no one will ever care what I have to say. No one cares about science and education. No, my content was shit. I wasn't showing up as who I was. I was afraid to show up as I was, and my content was shit. It had nothing to do with me not showing like my side profile on my page. It had nothing to do with that. Absolutely not, right? Which, if that's your thing, that's fine. But I'm saying like that was my fixed mindset in 2017, 2018 about my business. Like that was the approach I took. But then once I just started to be myself and make things consistently and try to help people and entertain them and show up for them and weave my personality. Like Allison's reels are like, that's her personality and her content. You kind of get an idea of like what she would be like if you hung out with her as a person by watching her reels, right? Yeah. And so you can't, like even me retrospectively comparing myself to previous versions of me, now realizing what the fuck did I actually do? How did I do that, right? But like, that girl had grit, and now I've learned a lot of lessons from that, right? But that transition phase is where all that action happened. It didn't happen when I was feeling bad for myself for not growing, for not actually doing the effort that needed to be done. And it didn't come from me having a big ego for what I've accomplished. It came from that humbling, very middle area that if you are a fitness professional, you know, right? It was like years 1 through 5 of my fitness journey where you don't know what the hell you're doing and you get corrected by the college bro for squatting in running shoes because you don't know any better and you're humiliated by it, right? I remember that to this day, right? Like that sticks in my brain. But like that's gonna happen, and you're gonna have that day where you fudge up on your post or your content, and you're gonna remember it for years later, but that you'll be better for it in the future. But you can't compare that day one, year one, to that future version. Like it's the same thing, the reps, the miles, the consistency, and while we're at it, we'll throw in maintaining your RPE.
We've solved it. We've solved the fitness industry.
We've solved the fitness industry. So that's funny. This is a funny parallel, but I have really bad stress management in the sense that like I'm someone who like can keep cool until I explode kind of thing. So I'm like a boiling pot of water, right? Like I I have a really high threshold and high capacity for a lot of things, but then I do a really bad job of living. I call myself Icarus. I fly too close to the sun all the time, and then I burn out. And I didn't realize I was doing this for all of my youth in my 20s until like really like the last few years, and I've gotten better at managing my what I want to have on my plate and versus feels good and like what I can actually realistically handle. Until I started working with Taylor Eckel with DPT, because I get nerve pain in my arm, which I've now realized is partially from computer work. But Taylor was like yelling at me. She's like, Alyssa, you have nothing wrong. I do have some instability issues from my laxity stuff, but she was like, Alyssa, you need to stop living life at RPE 8. Like, you have to stop living there all of the time. She's like, stop RPE 8ing your life constantly, right? Which is funny, because that's like what we tell people to do in the gym. But then like I was doing it all of the time. Like, so she's like, you need to sometimes drift back down to a lower RPE. You know what I mean? Like, or stop going to 10 all of the time. So she like, every once in a while, she'll like message me. She's like, RPE 8, Alyssa, RPE 8. And I'm like, damn it, Taylor. Like, but it's very, very true. And you can apply these practical principles. I love sport and fitness because I feel like you can parallel it to like almost everything in life. Yeah. Everything in life.
Yeah. I have the conversations with clients, although I use more of like a bucket metaphor when they come and they apologize profusely for like missing workouts or being like a week or two off on their training calendar. And I find it so interesting that I think women are more socially indoctrinated into like showing up as an apology. Like, I didn't do every single thing perfectly, so let me apologize for like being me, which is like totally fucked up. But I find it so interesting that they always apologize. I'm like, why? If you didn't work out, there was clearly something else going on. It's totally fine. Just because you didn't work out for a week or two or whatever, you missed a workout, you were probably had high stress, your sleep might have been crap, you had work stuff going on, you had family stuff going on. Like, there's all of these other buckets that people are constantly pouring into. So I always find it interesting that particularly women apologize for those things.
Yeah. No, I completely get that. Honestly, I think, well, in this podcast, maybe one thing that I love that Allison does in her business that I think allows for this to occur and more inclusivity within these things, but also one thing that I do within mine, not to toot my own horn, but like something that actually causes me a lot of back end issues, but I'm willing to do because it makes people feel okay with that, is that the biggest sticking point in my entire business, and if you're a client and you're listening to this, this is okay, because I pay Allison, the other Allison, to do this for me, is that I use Trainer Eyes, and Trainer Eyes will not let people manually adjust their calendar. I have requested it. I've talked to them on the phone. I have asked them. I have begged them. But if I need to adjust someone's schedule, we have to do it. They can drag workouts forward and back, but like the whole calendar, they follow a progressive program for 2 years. So if they take a vacation or miss a week or get sick or like have to leave the program and come back, we have to adjust it. And I've had people ask me, yes, I'm like, why do you do that? Why don't you just say no? And I'm like, because I don't want people to feel like, one, they're failing the program. I want them to be able to do it at their own pace. And I don't want them to also make progress too rapidly where they end up feeling defeated because they actually didn't do the work that was needed to get to the point that they were later in the program, right? One, I don't want people overexerting themselves sooner than possible, but I want them to know that like they're a human. They're able to, like, I give them resources on how to cut the program short, where to adjust it, what to remove, all of that stuff. I'm like, this is the program and this is the full version of it. But like, I've worked really hard within my business. And even when I trained Allison, I was like, no, you have to consider all these things. We need this program to be that if like I was going to do it, I would make progress and be able to make it fit my lifestyle and goals. But if your mom does it and signs up, she has to know that she can adjust it to her needs and preferences and understanding. And that was like, I mean, making group programming, which I know you probably get because you do it as well, it's hard because people are like, well, group programming, you know, everyone bashes group programming because they do one-on-one. I was like, but group programming can work for a lot of people if you can be really intelligent about how to make something that is mendable and not like, it's like plastic and not plastic. It's like, I'm thinking of your brain's not plastic or whatever it is, but like it's mendable and moldable to people's lifestyle and it factors in multiple needs. And that is one thing that is annoying. We have to do it every single week. We have to adjust all these people's calendars, but I will continue to do it until Trainer Eyes lets me not adjust it because I don't want anyone to feel like they're a failure or they have to quit or that they can't do it. I want them to know that like that program, and I do a progressive program because I don't want people to have the same program every month. I want them to follow the progression at the pace of which they can do so they can make progress within themselves. And that's something that I embedded in. And even though it's my biggest back end annoyance with my software, not my clients, I love you all, I will continue to do it because I don't want anyone to ever feel like they can't be a human and also have fitness goals, right? Because
Yes.
even if it takes someone, if someone might do 300 workouts in a year and another person might do 100, they're both moving forward. And I think you do a great job. And I have always wanted to ask you about this business model and how to integrate it, but I have too many other back end things I'm dealing with, where you do a fantastic thing where you offer people to pick what they pay. And I think that is so cool, because I think that's ballsy as hell, because I don't think a lot of people are willing to do that because of the whole like, okay, well, people are going to scam me and choose to pay the cheaper one, right? Rather than when they actually need to pay the cheaper one. But I think that's such a great way to allow people to make a choice for themselves of what they need for themselves and to make things more accessible, which I think is fantastic. So if you can speak more of that, I think that's something that no one else I have seen does, including myself.
Yeah, so this was actually born out of a conversation that I was having in the anti-racism space, where people were talking about creating access and cutting their prices. And coaches that were like, "Ooh, but if I cut my prices here, what does that mean for my business?" And then it kind of became, to me, it felt like a very backhanded thing. Like, you're cutting your prices just for people of color. Like, that feels shitty. Like, no, what if they don't need that? And so it was this whole very messy, very nuanced conversation around pricing. But again, like, one of the commitments in my business is social justice. And so I wanted to create access. Why not create what my minimums are and what I would be extremely happy with? And I came up with, actually, with a mentor of mine. Seven Stones Leadership is run by Gina LaRoche and Jen Cohen. Wonderful. They have and introduced me to a generosity pricing model. Like, if I want people to practice generosity, it's literally baked into my business. You come to the page and you just pick. You pick either the generosity price or the regular price. I'm not, cutting my prices and feeling like I'm giving you a discount. You're the one, as the consumer, choosing generosity. And so I like being able to flip that conversation on its head, as instead of the business owner having to do all of that work and take that piece on, I kind of hand that practice back to my consumer. What can you afford? What do you need? Can you practice generosity? And if not at this time, no problem. Maybe next time. So that's
Yeah.
the inside of my den, which it sounds very similar to how you structure things in Train Heroic. I use True Coach, and me and my co-coach Mallory, who's fabulous as well, we adjust calendars as well, because same thing. But again, from like the entire client journey, when they sign up, they get to practice generosity. When they get their welcome packet, our anti-racism statement is in there. So we kind of bake in these things into the business, so that we're all on the same page. We all understand the container rules, and we're all practicing those things.
No, I love that, because that's something like going into 2020. There was like, I think people forget that like you are paying for a lot of things in back ends of businesses, and you have to make so much money to pay for the things that you're trying to do, and they forget that. And I feel bad when like people every once in a while like come to me about asking for discounts, and I try to run sales and embed that into things. But one of the things I've tried to move towards this year is like, well, maybe I just stop with sales and I just lower my product cost across the board, so that way it's just more generally affordable all of the time, rather than like, well, here's a discount, here's this, here. And I mean, sales make people excited and they go and they buy things because it's cheaper, but I have been really weighing on how do I make my products and services, while making my bills in my business, more affordable for people who can't do that. And so I really appreciate that you do that and you lead with that in your business, because it is a big thing. I mean, I think a big thing in fitness access is people can't afford good training and programming. And my products aren't cheap. Like, good training and programming costs money. Like, that's not like something I'm gonna like pretend, right? And it's not to say that like good professionals don't deserve to get paid, but trying to find ways that like can allow people of all stages in their fitness journey to do that, right? And so I think I've kind of tried to like compensate for that by offering a lot of free resources for people, so that way like at least like they can just have it. But I think that's important for all younger coaches or businesses or practices, is like, how can you make sure that people feel like they can, you know, come to you and be a part of what you're offering. So I think that's really, really cool that you do that. And I like that it's called a generosity model, and it's not giving a discount, it's being generous, because it's giving people that opportunity to do that, which I think is really incredible. And as always, you do a really good job at flipping the narrative to looking at things through a different lens rather than the ones that we're typically looking at doing. So I think that's awesome, and I really wanted to highlight that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we are an hour and a half in, so we will end this party. I feel like Allison and I could probably rant all day.
We could.
She has so many good things to say.
Day.
Well, on that note though, Allison, I'm going to turn back and talk to the camera now. I feel like I was so into this conversation, I just like looked at the camera of your pixelated face the entire time. But with that being said, Allison did just start a podcast called The Den, which I haven't. You've launched your first episode?
Yeah, so it's The Den download, and there's 5 episodes out right now. It was like literally launched on Monday. So
I was gonna say, I was like, I knew you like literally just launched it. I didn't know how many episodes were out. So, my podcast girl just rearranged my airing sheet, so I don't think it says airing until February now. I have no idea what's going on in my own business. Welcome to the club, everyone. Well, I got rearranged on my end based on my productivity. But with that being said, Allison does have a lot of really good things to say about a lot of things. She has good programming coaching. Like, she is one of the people where, like, if you weren't going to train with me, I really truly want you to train with someone that is a better fit for you. And if what I offer isn't that for you, Allison is one of those people that I would recommend, who offers very similar to me, that I think is very high quality. But also go listen to her podcast, follow her, consume her content, go to her conference next year. I might show up if I can. Because there's just so many other conversations happening that I think are just so necessary. I've reduced the amount of posts I share to my stories, because I try to keep my stories shorter if I can, which they never are. But Allison is definitely one of those people who makes it in my rotation with the clapping hand emojis more often than not, because I'm like, fuck, I could never think of framing this way, but like, this is just brilliant in how it's worded. So with that being said, I'm gonna stop fangirling over Allison. So go follow her, listen to her stuff. I will have her email me links to everything. So if you're listening on YouTube or any other service, we will link the show notes in the YouTube or the podcast for all of the things. I'll have her link everything we talked about today, and all my links are always in the show notes as well. If you listen to this on YouTube, please subscribe, let us know something that you learned today. Same with the podcast, rate, review, subscribe. And if you put a screenshot on your story that you listened to this or share it along, please tag Allison and I. We always appreciate it. So thank you for another amazing episode of the Messy Middle Podcast. Allison, thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else you want to add for our audience before we sign off?
You totally covered it. Thanks for having me, Lyss. I really appreciate it.
Yes, I'll next time you have a bad day, just shoot me a DM and I'll send you a voice memo. Leslie No pep talking you. Back.
Yes, please.
You're a beautiful butterfly. Awesome. Thank you guys so much, and we will catch you on the next episode.